All right, so this is our Unit 1 History, Lesson 1. We are going to start. This is for our sound speed. It's for our sync. All right, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to you whenever you are watching this video. This is John, your mother language instructor, and here today I have a video covering our very first unit. So we are talking about history, and we are talking about specifically the history of the United States. So this series that we will be talking about, this is a three-part series, so we will begin today with our first part here. So here's what I want us to do, all right? If at any point during the video you would like to pause, and if you need a moment to look over what we have just discussed, or if you need to take a break, I would encourage you to do that, all right? There are some points in the video where I might suggest that you should stop and pause to take a moment. But I will be sure to walk you through that when that happens. In the meantime, I wanted to show you what we will be talking about today in class. Now, here are our objectives. I would like for us to create a timeline of American and Italian history together, to learn important dates and historical events of the United States of America. Now, if you're watching this video, we have just talked about in class this week, we've talked about history briefly, and we did a few activities that helped us understand how we can create our own histories by writing or reading in the present tense. So, what I would like for us to do, what I would like for us to remember, is that this history that we're talking about today in this lesson, over the course of this video, is a collection of facts over a long period of time. That's all history is, just a collection of facts over a long period of time. So today, here we can see in our picture of American history, we see a man who is standing on a boat, and it looks like that he's surrounded by soldiers, and that these people are crossing some sort of river. We see that there is ice in the river along the sides here and here in the bottom of the portrait. Let me ask you a question. Do you happen to know who this is? Who is this a portrait of? I'll give you a hint. This person is actually the first president of the United States of America. Do you know who he is? Let me give you another hint. This person here is, the capital of the United States of America is named after this man. Do you know the capital of the United States? So if you guessed that this is George Washington, you would be right. This is a picture of George Washington crossing the Delaware River in the middle of the American Revolution. Don't worry, we'll talk more about the American Revolution in a moment. So if you didn't know who that was, don't worry. We'll talk about him in just a moment. So in the meantime, let's take a look at our glossary. So these are terms that we will see in this lesson specifically. So as you can see, I have written the words in English here to the left in green. And here on our right column in black, you can see the definitions. You can see the definitions written in Italian, right? And here you can see it again, right? So on the left here, I have our terms written in English highlighted in green. And to the right, this column is in black, and these are our Italian terms. Now, these terms will be used throughout this lesson, and I've also included at the end of our presentation, I've included this slide again, just in case you need to look over these terms. Now, I would challenge you to write down any of these words that you don't know already. I would write those down in your notes. It might be helpful for you later on. But in the meantime, let's read these words in English together. We'll start here at the top. Events, history, timeline, occur, series. Now this is two words. We have century, one, singular, century, or centuries, plural, two or more. So we have century or centuries. Voyage, establishes, alongside, taxes, tensions, battles, delegates, declares, territories, ratifies, and the last word, adopts. Now, all of these words will be used in this presentation, and I have kept these words highlighted in green throughout. So if at any point you see a word that's written in green, just know that that is one of our vocabulary terms that you can see in this glossary at the beginning and at the end of this presentation, okay? So let's take a look and see. Ooh, we have a warm-up. Very good. We have a warm-up in our presentation. Who remembers what a warm-up is? We talked about this in our first week of class. Do you remember? Yeah, a warm-up is a chance to loosen up our English speaking muscles and our English ears and our English brains, all right? It's an activity that can warm us up to get ready for our lesson and to use English. So let's take a look at what our warm-up is. So here at the top, these are our instructions. So here's what I would like for you to do. I want you to draw a timeline. Do you know what a timeline is? What is a timeline? Yeah, a timeline is a line that we will draw on a sheet of paper. It will begin with a certain point in time. In this timeline, we'll begin with 1492. And the timeline will end at a specific time. Here, in this exercise, our timeline will end in 1802. So, when you draw your line, I want you at the beginning to write 1492, and at the end, I would like for you to write 1802. Let me give you an example of how to draw a timeline. So here, in my notes, this is what I would like for you to do. Instead of drawing your timeline horizontally, I would like for you to draw your timeline vertically. And I'll tell you why in a moment. But here, this is what I would like for us to do. So we will start by drawing a line down the center of our page. And if you need to, you shouldn't have to scroll on your sheet of paper, but I'm going to scroll just so that I can have enough space to draw our timeline. That should be enough room for us. Okay, so here's what I would like for you to do. Now that you've drawn your vertical line, I want you to write at the top of your page, 1492. That's when our timeline is going to begin, okay? And at the very bottom of our page, I would like for us to write, up here you can see I've already done it. Let me erase this. So I would like for you to write at the bottom of the timeline, 1802. Because remember, our timeline is going to begin in 1492, and it's going to end in the year 1802, all right? And here is the other thing that I would like for you to do, all right? On the left side of your timeline here, I would like for you to write Italy. Because in today's class, we are going to be talking about some important historical events that occurred in the nation of Italy. And on the right side of your timeline, I would like for you to write USA, or you can write the United States, or you can write the United States of America, however you would like to do it. All right? But I would like for us on the right, I want us to write the United States of America. All right? Because these are the two nations that we are going to look at together. We're going to look at their histories together in making our timeline. Okay? So now that we have made our timeline, let's scroll back over and let's look. So here is my question that I have for you. This is to begin our warm-up. I want you to think to your history classes. Do you know any important events in Italian history that occur within this period of time? And remember, I'm talking about 1492 to 1892, or excuse me, 1802, all right? Can you think of any important events that occur in Italian history during this time? And what I would like for you to do is I want you to write these events down on your timeline. All right? So if you can think of certain things that happen in the nation of Italy during this time, I want you to write those events down now. And finally, I want you to organize your timeline using the year in which these events occur. Let me show you. So if, for example, you have an event that begins close to 1492, that is where I would want you to write your event, okay? And if something occurs closer to 1802, towards the end of the timeline, this is where I would want you to write your events, all right? So we want to organize by year when these events happen, okay? So if you are following along at home, this might be a good time to pause the video and see if you can think of some events that happen over the course of Italian history now. And if you would like, you could even use some of your notes or your materials from your history class. So if you're studying, say, the Age of Exploration, you might want to look at your book. You could if you wanted, okay? So I'll give you a moment, pause the video now, and we will continue on in just a moment, okay? I'll see you in a second. All right, everyone, welcome back. So through the magic of television and radio, we have finished our timelines. We have written in a couple of different pieces of information. All right, we've done it to the best of our ability, but don't worry. If you didn't have too much to write, that's okay. I actually have a few dates that I think are pretty important for the nation of Italy. So over the course of this presentation, I will be adding a few things to our left side of our timeline. So don't worry, I'll help. I'll see if I can help, okay? So let's take a look. Now remember, here is what we are talking about today. Our theme, our subject, is the colonization of North America and the American Revolution. Okay? So remember, we are talking about the 15th, 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries all together. And this time includes roughly around 400 years, around 300 years. So we're talking about 1492 to 1802. Remember, that's when we're talking about today. All right. So here is our first event that we can add to our timeline. We can add to our timeline in 1492 that Christopher Columbus sails across the Atlantic Ocean on his first voyage to the Americas. Now, here's what I would like for us to do. Do you know where Christopher Columbus was from? What country was he born in? Do you know? Yeah, he was born in the nation of Italy. He's Italian. All right, so here's what I would like for us to do. Since this date, 1492, was important for the nation of Italy, as well as being important for the United States of America, I would like for us to write this event in both columns. Let me show you what I mean. So here we will write in 1492, here. In 1492, Christopher Columbus sails across the Atlantic Ocean on his first voyage. And here he discovers America, North America. All right. And then on our right side of the column, because remember, we're also talking about the history of the United States, I want us to write that same date again. So here we can write on the right side of our column, Christopher Columbus sails across the Atlantic Ocean on his first voyage. Okay? Excellent. So that is the beginning of our timeline. We start with that first event. Let's take a look and see what else happens over the course of this time period. Now, I do have a few Italian events that maybe we can add to our timeline, all right, before our next important date for American history. Let me show you what I mean. So we have a few wars that happen, okay? We have in 1494, we have the first Italian War begins. So we can write that here in our timeline. Our first Italian War begins. All right. And then again, there's another war that begins. We have another one in 1499. And this is called the Second Italian War. So in 1499, the Second Italian War begins. Okay? And one more in 1551. In 1551, I have our third or last Italian War. So the last Italian War begins. And this war lasts for about 8 years. It begins in 1551 and it ends in 1559. And this war ends when Henry II of France, Elizabeth I of England, Ferdinand I, the Holy Roman Emperor, and Philip II of Spain sign a peace treaty to end this last Italian war. All right? So that's what I wanted us to add to our Italian timeline. All right? At the beginning. And there is one more important date that I think we should add as well. In 1564, a very famous Italian was born in Pisa. Let me give you a hint. He was an astronomer. He studied the sky and the heavens. He studied space and stars and planets. Do you know who I'm talking about? Yeah, in 1564, Galileo is born. Galileo is born in Pisa. So I wanted to include his birth year, right? I wanted to include when he was born in our timeline, all right? So if we look back at what we have written so far, we can see that here in 1492, we have Christopher Columbus sails across the Atlantic Ocean on his first voyage. And then here in 1494, we can see that our first Italian War begins. Then in 1499, our second Italian War begins. And then in 1551, our last or third Italian War begins. And again, in 1564, Galileo is born in Pisa. All right? So that should bring us up to our next important year in American history. Let me show you what I mean. So let's go back to our presentation. Let's look at our PowerPoint and let's see what we can see. I'll give you a moment to think. What can you see in this slide? What are we looking at? What are we looking at? It looks like that we can see 3 boats. Here's the first boat, and the second, and the third. And these boats are docked along this body of water. It looks like it could be a channel, or maybe an inlet, or a bay, because we can see here on the opposite side of the water, it looks like we can see land over here. So we're not looking at the ocean, or maybe a part of it, but we do see some land over here. So I just wanted to point that out. And look here in the middle of this portrait, we see some people. And what does it look like that they're doing? What are these people doing? Do you know? I'll give you a hint. If you don't exactly know what they're doing, you can look down below here at our text. And what does our text say? Our text gives us a clue as to what these people are doing. Let's read together. Great Britain establishes its first colony in Jamestown, Virginia. Okay, so it looks like that these people are in the process of establishing the first colony in Jamestown, Virginia for the nation of Great Britain. Okay? So we can see that these men and women are building some sort of fort, it looks like. We can see the walls here are being constructed out of timber. We can see that there are a few tents over here in the middle of the camp. And look, I don't know if you can tell, but we can even see a very small Union Jack there on that flagpole. So this is a colony for the nation of Great Britain. Now, if you know your history, you know that there were other colonies that were established before this colony in Jamestown. But this is the first colony that Great Britain, that the nation of Great Britain established. And it would later become a part of one of the 13 states in the American colonies. So that's why I included this slide in our presentation for the history of the United States. Because eventually, the United States will fight a war with a certain nation to gain its independence. I'll give you a hint as to who that is here. Or if you look again at our flagpole in the center of camp, that's who the United States eventually fights for their independence. Now, our last thing, remember, this event happened in 1607. So this event happens in 1607. Great Britain establishes its first colony in Jamestown, Virginia. Okay? So let's take a look at our timeline and let's add that to our list. So here we can see, all right, we can see the events that we've written so far, and we know that 1607 happens after 1564. So we should write about here, 1607. And we'll write Great Britain establishes its first colony. Its first colony in America, in the New World. And this is in Jamestown, Virginia. Jamestown, Virginia. Good. All right. So let me check if we have another event that we can add to our timeline that's important to the nation of Italy. Let me look and see what we have. Ooh, it does look like we have something that we can add. It's another birthday from a famous Italian, this time an artist, a musician specifically. Let me write this down. So in 1678, we have Antonio Vivaldi is born in Venice. So in 1678, Antonio Vivaldi is born in Venice. So let's add that to our timeline. Let's add that to our timeline. Okay? All right. So let's move on and see what our next important event is in the history of the United States. You ready? All right. So here, tell me, what can you see? What are you looking at in this slide? What can you see? Yeah, absolutely. You can see that on the right side of this slide, there is a map of the United States. And it looks like that this is a modern day map of the United States because we can see the outlines of certain states that exist today that didn't exist in this time period between 1607 and 1707. I'll give you an example right here. This is my state. This is where I'm from. This is Tennessee. And Tennessee wasn't a state until a little bit later after the initial American Revolution. So, since we can see that state in this map, we know that perhaps this is a modern map of the United States. And here, we can see that there are some of the original 13 colonies here. Yeah, we can see that there are states along the coast here, along this eastern coast. We can see these states. Here is Maine and New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts here, Rhode Island, Connecticut. Here's part of New York and Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. So we can see these 13 colonies here in this darker shade of red. I would call that like a salmon. And then here in the lighter shade of pink, along this proclamation line of 1763, we can see that this territory is a province of Quebec, which at this time I believe is actually owned by the French, or it was claimed by the French, I should say. And then here you can see in this part in yellow, right, here is the Mississippi River, what I've just outlined. And to the left, or the east of the Mississippi River, you can see that this territory in gold is claimed by Spain. All right, so that is what we are looking at. We are looking at a map of North America, of the modern day United States of America. And during this time of 1607 and 1707, we can see the different locations or the different places that certain European countries have claimed as their own territories. And look, here, our text to the left says the same thing. Let's read this text together. Over the next 100 years, Great Britain establishes another 12 colonies alongside Virginia to form the 13 American colonies. All right, so we have learned by looking at this slide that for the next 100 years after Jamestown was initially founded, that there are more colonies that are established by Great Britain. And here we can see in this map where those colonies are. All right? So let me add that to our list. Okay? So let me add from 1607 to, let's say, 1707. So for this period, right, we can say that Great Britain adds another 12 colonies to its first, being Virginia, to its first colony. Excuse me, let me erase that. To its first colony, Virginia. I'll include that just so we don't forget. To form the 13 American colonies. Okay, so quite a lot happens over that 100-year period. Let me go ahead and draw a little bit more in our timeline just so that we have enough space. So a lot happens over that 100 years. Great Britain adds another 12 colonies alongside its first colony of Virginia, and these colonies together form the 13 American colonies, okay? We'll learn a little bit more about those colonies here in a second. So let's go back to our presentation. Let's look and see what else we can find. All right, so let's take a look at this next slide. Can you read the title here? This is a bit tricky. But I wanted to include this format of years because these signify a certain aspect of time. But first, let's try to read these. Let's read them first. So, if you remember, I've done it a few times already, a good way to abbreviate or to say these years is to start with the first two numbers, right? So we'll start with the number 1 and the number 7. Together, that number is 17, right? So we'll say 17 first, and then we'll look at our second part, the 6 and the 0 together. That number is 60, right? So you can combine those two numbers, 17 and 60, right? And when you add this S, it sounds like this, 1760s, right? Let's try it again for the second number. So we know this number is 17. And what is this number here? I'll give you a moment to think. It's a little tricky. What number is this number with 7 and 0 together? Yeah, this number is 70, okay? So together you can say 1770 and add the S, it sounds like this, 1770s, right? So whenever you see this S at the end of a date like that, we're talking about the decade, right? So if you listen to, say, rock and roll music that was really popular in the 50s, if you wanted to write that, you could say that we're talking about the 50s. Or say if you were talking about the internet and when the internet was created, we were talking about the year 1990, right? So you could write 90, and if we're talking about that decade, that period of 10 years, you could say that we're talking about the 90s. You add that S at the end, okay? So I just wanted to include that just so that you could see it, okay? I just wanted you to include that just so that we could see it, all right? So let's take a look. We'll go ahead and erase these. Give me a moment. I'll erase this. So in this slide, we know that we are talking about a period of time between the 1760s and the 1770s. So we're talking about those 2 decades or those 20 years. Now, let's take a look at our slide. Describe to me what it is that you see. What are we looking at? What are we looking at here in this picture to the right? Can you tell me? Yeah, so look, we see a man who is standing here with his left hand on his chin, and he is looking at what? What is this? Do you know? Yeah, he's looking at a poster, or you could say maybe a sign, right? He's reading a poster. And look here, this is what the poster says. It's talking about a tax on what? It's pretty similar in Italian, right? Tea. Okay. Yeah, this poster is talking about a tax on tea. Good. And here we can see that this man in the blue coat with the black hat on his head, his hand on his chin, he's reading this poster. And look, on the far right side of our picture, we can see a man with his back to us. He's wearing a red coat. And it looks as if he is a soldier, right? We see that he has a hat on. It looks like it's part of a uniform. And over his shoulder, he has what looks to be a musket or a rifle, a type of gun. And look, here at his hip, we can even see a saber, which is a type of sword. All right? Now, let me ask you another question. If you had to guess, which person do you think is British? And which person do you think is a colonist or someone who lives in one of the American colonies? Which do you think? Is it this person here on the right? Is he British? Or is this person here on the left? Is he British? What do you think? Yeah, absolutely. So the person on the right is British. This is a British soldier. And he is here in the colonies to help enforce the rules or the laws that are coming from King George III. All right? From King George. So, the soldier to the right is British, and the man here in the center of our portrait or picture is an American colonist. And this colonist is reading this poster. Now let's look at our text to the left. Let's look at our text. And here we can read together. During the 1760s, the British Parliament passed a series of taxes to bring American colonies under more direct rule. The taxes increase tensions between American colonists and the British Crown. All right? So, here's another way to describe what is happening. In these 2 decades, the British Crown needed to raise a lot of money. If you remember in your European history, they are in the middle of fighting a couple of pretty expensive wars, and they need money in order to do so. So, King George and the rest of British Parliament, they think to themselves, how can we raise money to fight these wars? And they look to the east, and they see their 13 American colonies, which at this point in time was a pretty wealthy place. There was a lot of money in this area specifically. So the British Crown and Parliament thought, we'll make them pay for this war. They are British subjects, after all. They are under the protection of the Crown. It's their duty to help pay for our war. Okay? So that is what they did. Okay? So they started to pass a series of taxes on these American colonists in order to pay for the war. And these taxes were not popular at all. Many people, many colonists were very angry about the fact that they were being taxed for a war that in their mind was not necessarily their responsibility to help pay for. So, let's take a look at our next slide. So let me ask you, what can you see in this portrait? What can we see? What are we looking at? So we can see that here in the foreground or the front of this portrait, we can see a collection of men. And look, they're all holding rifles or muskets. And some of them are even firing those muskets. And look at who they are shooting at. If you remember from our last slide, they're firing at British soldiers. And it looks like that these British soldiers are even shooting back at these men here in brown and blue. And we have one person here in a green coat. So it looks as if these two sides are fighting against each other. They are in an open conflict. Yeah. And look, here we can see that it looks like that there are 3 British officers who are riding on horseback. Okay. And look, here in the background, you can see all of this smoke, all of this gray smoke here. You can see that's on the battlefield. Okay, so it looks pretty chaotic, if you ask me. I would not want to be in that place at that time. So let's look at our text. Let's look at the text here at the bottom of the slide. Can we read that together? Let's read. The battles of Lexington and Concord are the first battles between American militias and British forces. These battles are the start of the American Revolution. Okay? So look, here in the upper left-hand corner of our portrait, we can see that this happens in the year 1773. Okay? So in 1773, the battles of Lexington and Concord are fought. Now, these battles, these 2 separate battles, were nicknamed something in American history. In school, when I was in your age and I was studying history, these battles were called, or the battle was nicknamed, the shot heard round the world. Okay? Because, fun fact, no one exactly knows who fired the first shot between these 2 forces, the American militias and the British forces. No one knows exactly who fired the first shot. But history will later tell us that this battle, being the start of the American Revolution, would end up being a very important event for not only the histories of the United States of America and for Great Britain, but also for the world. So these 2 battles were nicknamed the shot heard round the world. And it was for that reason, because no one exactly knew how this battle began. So that is what we are looking at here. We're looking at a painting of these 2 battles. All right? So let's go ahead and let's add this to our list. Let's add this to our timeline. So it happens in 1773 which is a little bit after 1707. So let's go down a little bit further on our timeline and let's write 1773. And I will write here the battles of Lexington and, let me write out and for us so that we can see. The battles of Lexington and Concord begin the American Revolution. Okay, so let's look at our next slide and see what we see. Describe to me what you can see in this painting. What are we looking at? What are we looking at? Yeah, so we can see here to the left that there is a large group of men who are seated in chairs. We can even see some of them here are standing, okay? So there's a large group of men to the left, and here around this desk, we see another group of men that are standing. And look, there are even some more here to the right. So we are looking at a group of people, or if you're looking at our text below, you might be able to guess that we're talking about delegates, that these are all delegates, okay? And here in this portrait, they are in the process of doing something very important. We can see that they're holding some papers in some of their hands. They might be writing on those papers, right? So let's look and see. Let's look and see. So sorry, I have a dog here that is just a little nosy about what we're doing during our lesson. So Mirtila, if you want to come in, you can. So here's what we are doing, okay? So we are looking at these delegates of our Second Continental Congress. Mirtila. Scusa, 1 second. Mirtila. Vieni. Sorry about that, everyone. So we have a pet friend who's joining us today for just a moment. She's going to be part of our lesson. Hi, Mirtila. So here is what we are doing. We are looking at the Second Continental Congress, and here they are adopting an article, a very important document that's called the Declaration of Independence. Have you heard of what the Declaration of Independence is? Let's explain what that is. Let me tell you. So here on our next slide, we can see to the left, there is a picture of the Declaration of Independence. It was written by these delegates of the Second Continental Congress. And look, our text to the right says that this document declares that the United States of America is a new nation and that it is free from British rule, and that the American Revolution begins. All right? So this document is stating that this group of colonists who are living in America, in the continent of America, that they no longer want to be a part of British rule, that they want to found for themselves a new nation. Okay? So they write this document, the Declaration of Independence, and it's a document that's saying exactly that we are a new nation here, that we are, this is the United States of America, and that we are separate from the crown, all right? That we are no longer a part of British rule. And this document was also considered to be another starting point for the American Revolution, right? So the battles that we talked about earlier, right? The battles of Lexington and Concord, those are considered to be the start of the conflict. But the Declaration of Independence, when that was signed here on July 4th, 1776, that's considered to be the United States, that's their Independence Day, okay? So that's a day that is celebrated every year in the summertime with fireworks and barbecues, and there's music and lots of patriotic stuff going on. So the Declaration of Independence is considered to be the start of the nation of the United States of America as well. So let's go ahead and let's add that to our timeline. Okay, so here we have in 1773, we've just written, we can see that in 1773, the battles of Lexington and Concord begin the American Revolution. And then 3 years later, in 1776, we have the Declaration of Independence is signed. The Declaration of Independence is signed. And remember, this document is stating that the United States of America is now an independent nation from British rule. Okay? So, let's take a look at our next slide. All right. So describe to me, what is it that we are looking at here in this picture? What are we looking at? Yeah, so look, we're seeing another group of men who are seated here around this room. And it looks like, again, very similar to our last slide. Some of them are holding papers. Some of them look to be writing. We see a little inkwell here. Yeah, and so these men, these are considered to be some of those founding fathers, those people that signed the Declaration of Independence nearly a decade ago, just over a decade ago. And look, here, this is what our text tells us. Okay, so let's read this part together. After successfully defeating the British in the American Revolution, the new nation, the United States, ratifies the Constitution of the United States of America. Okay, so here in 1788, we can see that this new nation, the United States, ratifies another really important document, not only for the history of the United States, but also for the world as well. The Constitution is a pretty important document because it does something very interesting that had never been done formally before it up until this point in history. So, in the Constitution, there is something that's called the separation of powers. Okay? Whereas before, in say maybe a monarchy where power was held by one person, say the king, and they held lots of different powers, right, through this one person, the Constitution did something called the separation of powers, where it divided up the powers that were held by that one person, the king, and divided them among three different parts of government. So the first being the executive branch, the office of the presidency, right? The second being the legislation, right, which is in the United States, Congress and the Senate together. And then the third being the judicial branch of government. And the judicial branch is the courts, okay? It's the court system. So together, these three different parts of government form the United States of America. And that there are certain things, there are certain checks and balances that limit the power of each of these branches of government. And this was done so that the United States of America would never again be subject to the rule of just one person, right? This is the foundation of American democracy as we know it today. It's this principle that there are a group of people that are in charge of governing everyone together, okay? So we'll talk more about that later, but I just wanted to explain to you why the Constitution is so important and why I included it here in our timeline for the history of the United States. So this happens in 1788 when the Constitution is ratified. All right, so let's add that to our timeline. So here we can see in 1776, the Declaration of Independence is signed. So let's write in 1788, we'll say the Constitution is ratified. Ratified is another fancy word of saying that it's signed, right? That now the Constitution is an official document, okay? So let's move on and let's look and see what else we can add to our timeline. Ooh, we haven't written in a while, we haven't written an event that was important for Italian history. Our last event here was in 1768. You can see it. Right? So in 1768, remember, Antonio Vivaldi is born in Venice, and we haven't written anything in this left column in quite a bit. All right? So let's add something important to our left side of our timeline. So here in 1796, I want us to write that Napoleon Bonaparte, I'm sure you've heard of him before, and his French army of Italy, they invade Italy. So we will say that in 1796, Napoleon invades Italy. Okay. And now let's look at our last important event. Because remember, our timeline goes all the way to 1802. That's when we're stopping our timeline, all right? So let's write 1802 here. Will be our last event for this presentation. All right, so let's look at our slide first. Describe to me what it is that you see. What are we looking at here? What are we looking at? Yeah, absolutely. Look, we see to the right, we see a map of the United States. And look, here below, we can even see that this is the United States in 1803. All right, so we're looking at a map of the United States in the year 1803. And look, here you can see, it looks like that there are parts of those original 13 colonies that we were just talking about here in green. And then look, in blue here, you can see 3 more states. Remember, this is my home state, Tennessee. That's where I'm from. And look, in Kentucky, to the north of us, you can see. And look, at the very top here, this is Ohio, right? So those are 3 more states. And then look, this area in light orange, we can see that this is the territory of Indiana. And here below Tennessee to the south, along the Gulf of Mexico, you can see that this is the Mississippi Territory. And then look at this large collection of land in yellow. You can see that this is the Louisiana Purchase, 1803. All right. And look, this is what our text says over to the left. Let's read this together. The United States buys land from the nation of France in the Louisiana Purchase. The United States doubles the size of its territories. Okay, so I've included this event because this was a very important event in the history of the United States, right? So the United States bought this land from the nation of France, and they added all of this territory to the existing country, the existing nation, right? And this would set the stage really for the next 100 years of this nation's history, right? Because all of this land, all of this space, right, was eventually divided up, and new states were created, and new states' governments were instituted, and new delegates or new representatives were then elected to Congress and the Senate, right? So all of these people were then starting to move, right? They were moving from the eastern part of the United States, and they were moving to the west to settle these lands, these places, okay? So I wanted to include this. I know that it's a little bit outside of the year 1800, right? Our time period was 1400 to 1800, but I wanted to include this because it was so important for really the next 100 years. And we'll see in our next lesson, our second part of the United States history, the history of the United States, we'll talk more about why this was so important, okay? So here's what I would like. Let's look, okay, at some of the places that are included in this purchase, all right? So here, let's look. Describe to me what it is that you're seeing. Describe what you're seeing. Yeah, so again, we're seeing another map of the United States. And this one was similar to one that we saw earlier, where we see the outlines of these modern states, right? So this is a modern map that's put on top of this historical map, and we can see here, this large area here is the Louisiana Purchase, okay? And here we can see those existing states, or the states that were a part of the United States at this time. And here in blue, we can see these different territories that existed. They weren't states yet, but they were territories, okay? So here, let's look at our text. The text says that these new lands include the states of Louisiana, Missouri, Arkansas, Iowa, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, and Oklahoma. Let me show you those. So Louisiana is here, right? Here is the state of Missouri, here. Arkansas is this state to the south, right, in between Missouri and Louisiana. Iowa is this state here that's above Missouri. North Dakota is here, modern-day North Dakota. And South Dakota is here. And then this state here, you can kind of see me outline it. This is Nebraska, all right? And then Oklahoma is down here in this state. It's the one that kind of looks like a pan, if you see it. It kind of looks like a pot, right? Like you can see the handle here, and then this is the little, the pot itself. All right. And then moving on, this purchase also included most of Kansas, the state here, Colorado over here, Wyoming up here, Wyoming, Montana, and then Minnesota, right, which is just over here. You can see just a portion of it. Okay, so I drew all over that. I made a mess of that map. Let me erase everything. Let me erase. Okay, so that is the lands. Those were the lands that were included in the Louisiana Purchase. All right, so let's take a look. Let's take a look at what we are going to see next week. So next week, we'll do something pretty similar. We're going to talk about the United States in the 19th century. So this is 1800 to 1900, all right? And we're going to do the same thing that we did today. We're going to review important dates in Italian history in this time. And we're also going to talk about the important events that happened in the United States history during that time. And our warm-up activity is going to be the same activity that we did today. We're going to create a timeline, just like we saw in this lesson, right? So we'll have Italy here on the left. We'll have the United States here on the right. We'll start with 1800 here, and we'll go all the way to 1900, all right? So thank you very much for listening, for watching this video. I hope that you found it interesting and enjoyable, at least. If you do have any questions about American history, or if you are very excited about it and you want to learn more, please come talk to me in class or when you see me in school, and I can give you more materials if you would like to study more about this specific period of time, okay? So again, thank you very much for everything. I really appreciate your attention and for watching this video, and I will see you all in school. So excellent. I will go ahead and stop now. Bye. See you soon.